Thanks so much, Julia, and thanks everyone for being with us today. So I just wanted to outline the 8 weeks that we have ahead. Really excited. Our project team is all here with us today, and we have a suite of speakers from across the globe who will be sharing their expertise, their best practices, their challenges, their stories of and methods of how they go about engaging in citizen science or volunteer monitoring or community science around aquatic resources and hydrology. So with these 8 weeks, we will be, as Julia just said, having some pop-up or lightning round speakers. We'll share that link with you. So if you're interested in sharing your project, you can do that. And I'm pleased to introduce the first of today's 2 speakers who will be focusing on best practices in project design. And that person is Julie Bastine. They use they and them pronouns. And Julie is on detail with the Environmental Protection Agency at the U.S. Office of Research and Development to assist with participatory science efforts. When not at the EPA, they are the director of the Alliance for Aquatic Resource Monitoring, otherwise known as ALARM, at Dickinson College, which is based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Julia has worked in the volunteer monitoring or participatory science field for 21 years. So I will stop sharing and I'm going to turn the program to Julie.
All right. Okay. I always like to pull up the screen before I start talking because it's hard to multitask. Well, thank you all so much for hosting what looks like a fantastic series. I'm really excited to see all these different topics that will be covered in the coming weeks. And thank you, CUAHSI and Chris, for inviting me to participate in the opening session. Really excited to be here. Chris gave a great overview of who I am. And yeah, I'm excited to give a little bit of a higher level view of some of the best practices in designing and implementing community-based science project or participatory science projects. So with the agenda for my 15 minutes, I'm going to touch a little bit upon the models of participatory science. I'm noting some of the names in the chat. A lot of you have some great depth of experience of working with communities and doing participatory science. So I'm sure these models are quite familiar to you. And then I'm going to bring that into talking about 2 central tools that can be used at the outset of designing participatory science projects. And then we'll do a Q&A at the very, very end. So the first thing I wanted to start with, for those of you who are entering the waters of starting a participatory science project, I want to underscore the significance of planning and the importance of having really crucial conversations before you get to that point of reaching out and doing your advertising for your first volunteer. Thinking about some of the projects that I've been involved in over the years, it has taken anywhere from 6 to 18 months to get a program ready to be launched and up and off of the ground. And that, I think, really speaks to attention to details, some of those key considerations that you have to have as you're building partnerships with the community and engaging in collaborative data collection. So in those planning processes, it's important to think about your goals, your values, your approach. It's good at the outset to be thinking about the different stakeholders that you might want to engage with your project so that they possibly can be at the table as decisions are being made, and making sure that right from the outset that you have clear guidelines around how communication will happen. And any type of community-based partnership, it's really important to have open, clear, and two-way avenues for communication to make sure that expectations are clear and folks know what they're signing up for. This is a slide and some bullets that I pulled from a webinar that took place in 2016, hosted by the National Water Quality Monitoring Council's Volunteer Monitoring Work Group, that looked at some of the characteristics of a successful program. And some of those goals include clear goals, defining your data use right from the outset, assembling a good representative team to help make those decisions, strong coordination, training, tools like study designs and quality assurance project plans, data review, informed equipment selection, strong metadata, and program evaluation. I mean, these are a lot of ingredients to make a very successful participatory science cake. So a lot of things to be thinking about as you're thinking about what makes for a strong program. And there's the link to the webinar here at the end as well. So when I think about some of the typical processes I've had in working with communities to design and implement water quality monitoring programs, that's my background. Typically, it follows this kind of trajectory, and I'm sure everyone here has their own steps that they see in the participatory science cycle, but these are the steps that I encounter the most. So first, it starts off with that question, or perhaps it's a concern. Depending on the model that you're using for your program, researchers might be coming up with the questions, the community might be coming up with the question. But long story short, there's some sort of impetus and need for data collection. So there's a coalescing of folks that come around this idea and spitball further to think through, like, what does that look like? Once, some of those initial goals or questions have been formulated, then you move into, implementing your program. There's a really strong role here for technical assistance and that partnership with communities or volunteer scientists, with professional scientists or technical support providers. This is where you see that study design getting fleshed out. This is where a quality assurance project plan would be written. And this is also the phase in which data collection trainings take place, all connecting back into those quality assurance project plans and things like that. And then depending on your question and in your study design, you'll go ahead and put an outline as to when is the right point to be thinking about the data and having those checkpoints for your quality verification. So the second that you do your trainings, you have to make sure that people are using their equipment correctly and collecting the best credible data that they can. And then from there in your timeline, you probably have a point when you want to start looking at the data and starting to discover those stories in the data, doing your interpretation. That lends itself to data use, which then lends itself to program evaluation. And one thing I want to put out there, as you're thinking about study design and noting some of the participants that are in the list here, and I noticed Karen Cooper is one of the participants and has just worked with a team on creating some incredible tools around data ethics. And so Karen, if you want to drop that link, please do. It's a great resource and definitely has its place as you're setting up your program, thinking through those values and ethics moving into your program. So here I want to come to those models for participatory science engagement. This is coming from a paper in 2012, looking at these different C words connected to different ways of engaging the community in scientific data collection. And really the takeaway I want you to observe from this slide is looking at the role of the community and or volunteer scientists in the scientific process. I think the majority of the field really focuses on contributory, collaborative, and co-created projects. And you'll notice in those three, there's an increasing role of the community in the scientific process. And that all connects back to what your goals are and what your values are with your program and how you want those data to be used. So depending on the model that you use, you'll take some slightly different approaches. So study design is one of the best practices that we see in the water monitoring field across the country. One of the original people to put this topic and approach onto paper is Jeff Dates. He was formerly with River Network. Barb Horn, who is recently retired from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, is also a fantastic expert in study design. And I had the privilege of being trained by Jeff at a very young age and the start of my participatory science career. But study design follows a number of different steps, and we whittle it down into these 6. So first, again, taking stock, thinking about the resources that you have to implement community programs. Something we like to talk about in the water field is that volunteers are cost effective, not cost free. This is not a free program. You have to be ready to invest staff time. You have to be able to ready to invest money in equipment and QC and all those things. So taking stock of those resources and asking yourself, do you have the resources needed to implement your program goals? And then starting to think about defining the scope. What questions will data collection help answer? So when I facilitate this with a community partner, that's always what we want the community group to identify. And this is using a co-created model approach. They'll have lots of different topics of concerns, but at the end of the day, you want to land on a question or 2 that then their monitoring program will help answer. And another key question in defining the scope is how will you use the data? Because that connects to then your data quality and your methodology recommendations and things like that. Once you get through the defining of the scope phase of the project, then you'll get into your monitoring specifics, the who, what, where, when, and hows. That phase of this facilitation tends to go pretty quickly. That's where that nice hybrid and collaboration with a professional scientist or service provider comes into play, because we'll often be making some of those recommendations based on what the community decides in defining the scope. And then we get into talking about data. How are you going to manage those data? When does interpretation start? And what are some of your goals around data communication? Because you want to make sure that right from the outset of your program, you're setting your program up for success to support those goals. And then once you've come up with your data goals and requirements, then it's coming into those quality assurance measures, your internal and external QA checks and the different tools that you have in place. That leads to the development of QUAPs for some programs. And then finally, roles. What are the tasks and who will do them? And this helps with identifying the different roles that volunteers can play, and it might also inform your recruitment strategy, which we'll talk about a little bit more. So again, when you're defining that scope of the project and thinking of those questions and thinking through your data use goal, it's really important that, you know, there is that collaboration with service providers or technical support system to make sure that the data quality being generated in a program is matching the intended data use goals that a community partner or your program might have. And I just wanted to link or, you know, put the screenshot here of the QA handbook, a revised QA handbook that came out of the Environmental Protection Agency a handful of years ago, a great resource as well. So this is a slide that a lot of us who've been around the watering hole for a while or the water cooler for a while have seen iterations of this many times throughout the years. And this is the spectrum of data use. And this particular image comes from the National Advisory Council for Environmental Policy and Technology. There are 2 reports that came out of NASEP a couple of years ago that specifically connected into values, tenets, and coalesced ideals around participatory science. And it has the spectrum of data use in there. And so really, as you're moving from community engagement and education and moving down the line into regulatory decision-making and things like that, you're increasing the amount of time involved in data collection, expense of equipment, QC, and everything. So, you know, it's really important to be thinking about those data use goals right from the beginning of your program. Okay, so that's like really high level study design. Usually I spend like an hour doing that training, but that at least gives you some of a sense of the steps that that you talk about in that. And really in that last phase, you know, taking stock of like the different roles and who needs to do what in the program gets into how you set up your volunteer recruitment and your volunteer engagement strategy. So in addition to coming up with a study design, in addition to writing your QUAP, if that is essential for your program, you really need to think through your volunteer engagement strategy also before you do your first, you know, call out for volunteers. And so again, I brought back this this framework, these models of public participation in scientific research, because again, when you're thinking about the different roles that volunteers, scientists are playing in the scientific process, in your volunteer engagement strategy, thanks, Julia, you're going to need to think through all those different roles and recruiting for that, and making sure you have skill building in place to support people with those different roles in data collection. So with volunteer engagement steps, again, having that organizational check-in, like, do you have the staff and the people power to manage this? So Chris mentioned my host institution, Dickinson College Alliance for Aquatic Resource Monitoring. We have a regional monitoring program. It has 130 volunteers, and it is 1.5 FTEs to help coordinate that, all combined and put together. And fantastic data collection that comes out of that, but it's significant investment in resources and thinking through what you need to have in place. Planning is significant. Again, thinking through like, what's your calendar look like for the year? How many touch points do you want to have with your volunteers? When do you need to be doing QC checks? All that kind of thing. Paperwork is really important. Especially in this day and age, everyone, we need to have code of conducts as a part of our volunteer agreements. You need to make sure you have your volunteer agreements and, your photo release forms and things like that. There's definitely a significant paperwork phase, and making sure that the values of the programs and what both the volunteers should be expecting out of the program and what our expectations as program organizers, it's really important to have that nice and laid out clearly in the beginning. And then that gets into your recruitment, retention, and celebration strategies. One of the things that is my personal goal for everyone in their participatory science programs is that we don't have volunteers leave without saying goodbye. We always like to make sure we celebrate their contributions to generating good science. So there's lots of different things to be thinking about as you're developing your volunteer engagement strategies. And again, that connection of, volunteers to your vision, mission, annual work plan, and budget is really important. If volunteers are not reflected in your vision and mission, you should be going back to the drawing board and looking at your strategic plan and seeing where it fits in, and ask yourself, is this the right time to be engaging volunteers in data collection? And again, cost effective, not cost free. So some other engagement planning tools, again, making sure that you do have that strategic plan for your organization, identifying that connection in with volunteers, making sure that you have a job description for your volunteers. Volunteers like to know what they're getting into. I'll wrap up, Julia, thank you. So having like that job description so folks have a sense of their expectations, and a point person with your organization is really, really important. So with that, I will bring some my final thoughts, getting into like diverse participation. Make sure you're targeting stakeholders early on in the process, and thinking through the different folks you really want to have at the table in your programs. They should have a voice in the creation of your program. Let the community inform the approach there. And, think through inclusive and accessible skill building opportunities. Thinking through like the timing of your workshops. Is it accessible to all different types of job schedules? Balancing diverse commitments with family care, having child care at your trainings, having food at your trainings, and things like that. And thinking through the ways to minimize your financial burden is absolutely crucial to creating the door to open of access to your programs. And with that, I'll bring it to a close. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. So you can tell this is a topic that is worthy of more than 15 minutes and really challenging to fit into. So thank you for synthesizing down and giving us those key points. One of the things that we wanted to do today, in addition to getting this introduction to how do we have best practices in participatory science, and thinking about diverse participation, we know our audience here with us today. Well, we don't know. This is what we want to do. We know that our audience is broad, and we want to try to understand better who everybody is. So we have some poll questions for you that we want to ask, just to get a sense of people's roles, people's geographic distribution, and the different types of ways that you are integrating with participatory science, whether that's as a practitioner or as a participant or as a researcher or somebody interested in the field. So on your screen, you should see now 4 poll questions, and feel free to go ahead right now and fill in those questions, your answers to those questions. And we will show you the results in about 2 minutes from now. Julia, can you give us an update on the percent of folks who have responded?
Yes, you guys are speedy. We're already at 86%. So we'll close it in just a couple more seconds here.
Fantastic. So while people are still doing their voting, just to share, because we do have a wide variety of practitioners here, we know that there's a wide range of knowledge, and we wanted to kind of put things together as the weeks go on, starting with how do you get going for those who are new and showing those best practices. We also wanted to make this an opportunity for a global network. How is it we can work with one another and learn from one another as practitioners or project leaders to be able to do better with this participatory science around hydrological monitoring or water resources monitoring. And so we hope that we will be able to have you see that we have about 123 people who are currently on this webinar, and hoping that we can use these as a way to get to know one another and to make an international network of folks who are interested in this field. So Julia, would you like to share the results with us?
Yes, the results are currently being shared. Panelists, I'm not sure if you have access or can see them, but audience, I think that you can.
I can, now that they're just on a different screen. So this is 3/4 of our folks are from North America. We've got South America is represented, Africa is represented. We have about 20% from Europe, and Australia is also represented. So thanks everybody from across the globe. We have folks, let's see, it looks like we are dominated by researchers, 42% researchers, about 1/4 citizen science practitioners, just about 20% are other, and we have 11% students and 6% citizen scientists as a main role. We know that about 89% are in the field of water resources, 18% are in some other type of environmental science, 16% are citizen science researchers, 3% are not a researcher or a student, and 4% are some other representation. And then the last question, describing involvement with citizen science, we have about 58% are project leaders, 22% are participants, 24% are data users, and 25% are currently not actively involved in citizen science. So really interesting distribution, and thanks for everybody for sharing your results. I'm going to go on to introduce the second speaker for today. So our second speaker is going to focus her talk on how you recruit diverse participants. Julie started talking about that a little bit, but the second speaker is Liz McQuain, who serves as the Community Science Federal Liaison for the National Sea Grant Network in the United States. This position is partnered with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the U.S. Geological Survey. Liz is based at Louisiana Sea Grant in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I will turn the presentation time back to Liz.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me speak today. I'm going to do the same as Julie and go ahead and share my screen and get started. All right. So once again, my name is Liz McQuain. I will be talking with you guys about recruiting diverse audience for citizen and community science programming. The content of my talk today, I'll start off with just a brief overview of the benefits of diverse participation. I'm sure a lot of you guys know this, but I always think it's great to reiterate the why we're doing this, just to keep that in our heads. And then we'll move on to intentional engagement. I'll talk about some of the key aspects of that. We'll look at some of the factors of lack of participation, because that can inform the actions that you take and then go back and think about your intentional engagement. So again, brief overview, benefits to diverse participation. I like to say that there's co-benefits. So researchers that are working with community members and participants are able to either identify new research questions, area of interest, they're gaining new perspectives, obviously obtaining new data and information. You know, that's the purpose of the projects and programs normally. And it's an opportunity to increase the societal value of their science. And then traditionally you see participants have increased STEM literacy. That goes beyond just, you know, school age. That's also adult participants. There's encouragement of environmental stewardship, that connection with their natural environment. And then looking more at like the school age children and then sometimes adults, a new interest in scientific careers that may not be something that was on their radar, something that they saw, or careers they saw people in their community and those around them pursuing. So that can open the door to new opportunities and then create more diversity within our science fields moving forward. So intentional engagement and collaboration is something that should be started early. A lot of what Julie said really plays along with this, and it's great that she had that overview before because a lot of this goes into project design. So the earlier you can start thinking about recruiting diverse audiences, the better. If your program or project's already existing, it's not too late to be thinking about it. A lot of the times participatory programs and citizen community science programs are adaptive. They change with what's going on, whether it's a weather event that came through and there's a new question, or an altering of funding. You've either got more or less. Priorities change. So being adaptive, it's what we all do. But starting early on allows for the co-development of ideas and questions. So you really get that ownership of the program. And then that helps align the research goals with community priorities. You're hearing what community members, what participants are interested in, what they're concerned about, or they may even be learning what they should be concerned about. And so that helps create a connection and an ownership and a pride of what they're doing and what they're involved in. And then it sounds a little harsh, but targeted and personal recruitment. When you're talking about like maybe like a phishing scam or something, targeted could be bad. But this is more so to say it's less broad. It's not just sending out an email to a listserv and say, please share, or putting up a flyer at one community board in your area of interest. It's more direct. It's personally getting into that area, meeting the people. It could be having one-on-one conversations. It could be directly mailing the flyer to households in a zip code, attending community events. If there's a nonprofit or if there's organizations in that area that put on regular, I mean, it could be a local pop-up with vendors. It could be music, you know, whatever it is, where the community is gathering, going there and having those conversations and meeting people, making those personal connections, which really leads into relationship building. That, from what I've read in the literature, what I've experienced and what I've heard is key. So I'm sure I'm saying something that a lot of you guys have heard already, but really building those relationships and building trust with participants and researchers and all that are involved in the process is truly important for not only participant recruitment, but retention as well. And so there can be a lot of perceptions of the scientific community as being closed off. There can be distrust, especially in under-resourced communities, because they are typically the recipients of environmental injustice. So there can be distrust with either certain organizations or agencies. So having conversations, having the interpersonal connections, breaking down those silos of thinking there is an us and a them, and that this is a project that you're working on together can really help address the root of the distrust and build build a connection, build a relationship, building a collaboration that can persist and continue and can lead to, hopefully, usually the goals are solutions, solutions and actions. And depending on your program or project, it can grow in scope, it can grow in size or not. It all depends on the goals. As a preface, I will probably say it depends a lot because all programs are so different. So, you could aim to have your program grow across the coast, or your goal is just to continue for past 2 years. It always depends. And then within relationship building, Julie touched on this and did a great job of saying open communication. You've got to have the two-way street of sharing information and your intention with the program or project. Who is owning this data, for one? What is this data going to be used for? Who is it serving? Do those align with community priorities? Also, including participants throughout the research process helps with the relationship building and the trust building, breaking down the silos. And it can also lead to better problem solving and creative solutions because you're having different perspectives and you're having folks from hopefully interdisciplinary, you're having people that work in the social sciences, the natural sciences, communications, formal, informal leaders in your community and participants all together. And so you're having a bunch of different ideas and wealth of knowledge at the table. And then along with that, determining the best mode of communication. Spoiler alert, it's not always email. Not everyone checks their email every day. Not everyone has access to the internet or to reliable internet. And that can be anywhere. I will say a personal anecdote here in Louisiana. I have Verizon, which I have horrible cell service. I will get calls dropped all the time. It doesn't necessarily have to be, rural areas. It can be urban areas as well. So determining what participants are going to check the most, respond to the most, is key for continued engagement. Because if they're not having communication from you, normally when you're volunteering with something, that's going to be the first to drop off your set of priorities. And having that open communication can lead to participant retention, because say you're volunteering for something and you're getting a little snippet of what you're doing. You know that you're collecting water quality data for a data set, but you don't know why. You don't know who this data is going to serve. You don't know if it's even benefiting you at all. What's the point? There's all sorts of questions that come up. And if you don't have the communication in a two-way channel to answer those questions, then why bother? Why would I collect this information if I don't know what it's for? So having being open and transparent about what your data is being used for, who's owning it, what are the end goals for that data is really key for retention. And then, as with everything, it helps build trust. It builds a relationship, and you take pride in what you're doing because you can pinpoint to, oh, I'm helping this particular water body with this particular problem, and I live here, so it's important to me. Let me get my friends, my neighbors involved with this. So then that can also lead to further recruitment of participants. And then something else Julie touched on great was shared goals and values, establishing where you have common ground. That helps to build the relationship and trust, but also having the shared goals. So sometimes programs are just contributing to a larger data set, and that's hard to contextualize of what's my purpose and what's my contribution to this. So being able to break down the benefits and the goals and the I just lost my word. the purpose of what you're doing is really key to having that community connection, because it's hard to relate to a data set, right? So it can also breed opportunities for other research questions or other ways to use the data in the short term, along with the long-term goals. So making sure that there is that contribution of ideas, and you're not coming in with established research questions and you already know everything that's going to happen and you just kind of need people to collect the data, which is the old traditional view of citizen science. And so going into the factors of lack of participation, there's particularly one paper that was written by Raj Penya in 2012, and he does a great job, and I've gotten to hear him speak a couple times, and it's always a pleasure, of outlining a lot of the factors of lack of participation. So, namely, you have other priorities and responsibilities. Going out and collecting data may be the last thing that you need to do if you're having to take care of a family and you have work, and there could be after school activities, there could be multiple jobs. So other things just take priority. Childcare. Maybe data collection or training is happening after school and you have your kids, but so you don't feel like you can go. That's a barrier to participation. Or it's happening during school or during work hours. Time conflicts, always an issue. There's also could be less access to natural settings. That could be due to proximity, living in urban areas, and there may be a lack of public transportation or lack of personal transportation, not owning a car or having access to a car during the time you would need one to participate in such a program. Something I touched on earlier was, distrust. What are the causes of that? It could be something, sensitive that is hard to overcome and takes the time and the effort to build those relationships and, show your intentions. And that would, that's a big issue. And something that I've experienced in my limited experience over the past 4 years and have seen more recently is engagement fatigue. So communities are constantly not constantly, but more so being reached out to and maybe talked at rather than engaged with. And there may be less actions and solutions as a result of those engagement activities. And so there's fatigue with another organization coming in and wanting to talk about flooding or water quality. And it could be just being presented this information over and over again, and there's not the conversation that leads to solutions and actions and the collaboration of how we're going to address this issue. So that's also something to keep in mind as a factor of lack of participation. Experiences in the past may be non-solution based, so what makes this program different, and how do you communicate that? And then lastly on this slide, I just want to share a quote from that paper I mentioned that I can share that citation after, that I think is something that I didn't necessarily think about at the start of my work with citizen and community science programming, but it's that the disconnect between the norms and priorities of the research community and the values and the aspirations and cultures of many historically underrepresented communities can lead to that either lack of participation, distrust, or just fatigue of being engaged and not being included in the actions and the solutions. So I have just a few actions to consider. Like I said earlier, everything depends. It depends on your scope, what communities you're trying to engage with, what are their barriers and their obstacles. And so that really is what informs your actions. But these are just some general best practices. And a lot of the times when you're doing your program design, you're thinking about who you're going to be engaging with. partnering with existing organizations is a great way to start. Figuring out where your community and participants are at, who they're engaging with already, and what they're participating in. Also having an interdisciplinary team. So including different perspectives and different areas of expertise helps enrich your actions and your engagement moving forward. Incentives for participation, addressing those barriers and obstacles that lead to lack of participation. Childcare. Could you have like a child enrichment station where they're coloring you know, a little map of the creek that you're interested in, or they're have like sea creatures, or you know, whatever it may be. And then including other ways of knowing, traditional ecological knowing as a means of information and data to be used, and then redefining success. Not everything ends in a publication. Not everything ends in a professional presentation. It could be just the increased number of folks attending your training. It could be that you had something shared on a social media and reshared by something else. Redefining those areas of success. And then I just wanted to end this with some actions to avoid that were typically seen in traditional citizen and community science programming and can be seen as exploitive, which is the disappearing act. Going in with a set research question and a set project design, thinking that volunteers are here to collect your data, and then you leave. They never see what comes of that data. It could have something to do with their community. How would they know? You've disappeared. And then also checking a box, saying that you'll have one community event and that you'll engage volunteers and you'll train them, and you're just checking the box. You're not having that relationship. You're not seeing the priorities and the values and where they align. Minimal inclusion. This also kind of, you know, depends on the project and program, but if you're really looking to engage with diverse participants, there needs to be inclusion throughout the process and throughout all aspects of your program or your project. And then being on a need to know basis. This kind of gets at the open communication aspect. If you're only sharing certain amounts of information, it could be seen as secretive or shady, or that you're hiding something, and that shouldn't be the case if you're doing community-based programming. So having that open line of communication and not being like, oh, well, you don't need to worry about that. You know, have them make that decision for themselves if it's going to be important or not. But this is my conclusion. Thank you for listening to me. I had like a few papers that I used, and along with experience in anecdotal conversations. So I'm happy to share those citations that really get at the lack of participation, like targeted recruitment, and kind of what the demographics of volunteer participants look like. Happy to share that in the chat. Here's my email. And a shameless plug for our Sea Grant community science website that kind of shows the work that we do, in case you're interested in that. But thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liz. I think you brought up a lot of really interesting conversations that can be expanded upon, and that brought up some challenging thoughts around kinds of projects that I've worked with, and thinking about for instance, using volunteers is one thing that a colleague, Elizabeth Heron, talks about, and how we go about that. And you used a nice term of engaging with or partnering with community members. So I do want to turn to the question and answer part of our Zoom system here. And I see Karen posted that they had developed the data ethics toolkit for participatory sciences, and has included a link there. Thank you, Karen, for putting that there and for flagging that, Julie. And I will welcome other questions. It looks to me like some of them just disappeared. So Julia, let me know what happened there. Do we need to answer any of those live, or should we, or do others have questions that you would like to ask either Julie or Liz about their presentations and the things that they have shared with us about designing a project and engaging with diverse participants in recruit or building diverse participation?
It seems like Julie was especially quick on the draw, and they've responded and typed an answer out. Julie, would you like to elaborate on the question you just answered?
Yeah, so a couple of the questions were about some of the links that were shared. Please check out the responses. I did put EPA's Vision for Participatory Science in there, and also linked some other resources like the NASEP report, and then also the National Water Quality Monitoring Council's volunteer monitoring webinar on building credibility into your program. So all of those links are answered in the chat. And then there was a question that came in just now about, how do we fund this? And I'm not familiar with the funding structures in Argentina where the question was based, but I can talk about some of the ways that I've seen people leverage funding in the States. One, balancing program development, and then also balancing some of the values that we're talking about around engaging diverse participants in our program. So I did break it up federal to non-federal. The National Science Foundation, EPA, other granting entities out there, we've been able to leverage grant monies to help support the creation and implementation of projects. And so I think sometimes in the federal space, that's a great way to build the building blocks of a participatory science program, thinking through development of your protocols, the study designs, writing your quality assurance project plans, and starting to think through your volunteer engagement strategies. There's going to be a webinar actually tomorrow, hosted by NASA's CUAHSI initiative, that's actually going to walk through the federal agencies and their different funding mechanisms for participatory science. So definitely recommend that people chime into that, because that's going to be a much more in-depth look at the different funding structures, at least in the States, from the federal programs and the different initiatives they can support. The other thing I put out there is thinking about non-federal funding to help think about some of the things that Liz and I were talking about in terms of increasing access to participation in these programs. So when you're thinking through your volunteer engagement strategies and you're identifying those diverse stakeholders that you wish to engage, think about what facilitates that. And family foundation grants often can be a space where you can invest in things like childcare and food at meetings, and even thinking through partnership stipends. That's a really common practice to think about partner stipends and/or thinking through internships to help create those pathways of involvement into your programs. But sometimes it's a little bit harder to be funded in the federal space, and so family foundation spaces might be a more appropriate way to go for some of those investments in volunteer engagement. Not sure if other folks had things they wanted to add to that.
Thanks for that, Julie. I see a lot of other things that were coming up in the chat. I do want to recognize one thing. We apologize for missing Asia in our poll. I think we were going to try to redo it. I know we've lost a few people, so that we'll throw it up here, and we haven't added Asia. Sorry for the oversight. So folks, we're going to do it one more time to answer that poll to be further inclusive. I also see a bunch of questions. I actually tried to put a link in for the NASA webinar, but I did it wrong. So I apologize that I somehow have now made it so I can't answer the question, but we can fix that. There's questions here about from Sadie. I work in local government. We've been using co-design as a mode of community engagement. In that model, facilitators attempt to reduce barriers like childcare, transportation, meals, etc. But we also compensate them for their time participating. Is that a consideration in newer volunteer science programming? Liz or Julie want to field that?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm looking again at the participant list, and there's a couple of people in our participant list who have actually written about increasing access to volunteerism. So the stipend, like the paying of volunteers is an emerging conversation. Yeah, so it is a conversation that is taking place. I have not yet been able to figure out a way to make that happen in our programs. And I'm not speaking from an EPA perspective, but thinking through my host institution. So really what we have done with the stipends is thinking about investment in specific community partners and or thinking through the internships lens, but I don't have a really good case study or an example of paying volunteers to do data collection, and just would invite folks that have written about this topic who are on our participant list to perhaps maybe put that into the chat and link to titles of articles and things like that.
Thank you. I think we're going to run out of time for answering questions. So what I will offer is that we can review the questions here and we can try to summarize some responses to all of them in some way and get that back out via Julia to the list after the webinar.
We may be able to add it to the CUAHSI website for this webinar.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay, that sounds like a great plan.
I am seeing that question about data quality in the research project. So, you know, I think that there's still common pushback on community collected data. Also noting one of the participants on here, not sure if she's still on here, Susan Holdsworth at EPA Office of Water. One of the things that Susan talks about a lot is data of documented quality. And there are a lot of things that we can do to ensure that we have the metadata that corresponds with the data being collected so that data users can make informed choices. And that's where I would just do a shout out that folks who are developing participatory science programs, to make sure you have that strong partnership with a community and a scientist and a community and a technical service provider to make sure that you're building your program up with success, thinking through your quality assurance, and quality control measures. There's a lot of things that we can do to maximize the quality of data that can help support these data to be used in diverse spaces. But the program has to be set up to capture that from the beginning with your standard operating procedures, your monitoring methods, manuals, and then the metadata that stays with the data as it's being shared out. So just wanted to quickly give a shout out to that, or a quick response to that. And then I did link in the chat to EPA's Quality Assurance Handbook. If folks want to look at that for some of those different benchmarks that you can use to help increase the quality of your program and think through some of the decisions you need to make in your program as you're developing it.
Thanks, Julie. So just in the interest of time, we will look at these questions. We'll get responses. We'll work with Julia to get those posted on the CUAHSI website. And so we will answer everything. But two more things. One, again, is a reminder that we are interested in folks having these 2-minute pop-up or lightning talks in our upcoming weeks of this webinar series. And Julia, if you'd be so kind as to put the link again in the chat to where people can register for those pop-up opportunities, that would be fantastic. And then the second thing we wanted to call out is we want you to pay attention to the time zone. We do have a spring ahead changing of clocks happening kind of in weeks 3 and 4. We will follow the US time zone, so it will always be at noon Eastern time, but that may be at a different time in Europe for those 2 weeks before Europe changes their clocks and other countries are changing clocks. So please do pay close attention to the time zone for particularly weeks 3 and 4 will shift a little bit in places that haven't changed with the US change in time. So thank you again to Julie and to Liz for your presentations and sharing your expertise, and folks for asking great questions and interacting with us in the chat. We appreciate your being here and look forward to spending some more weeks with all of you, learning and sharing with our future suite of presenters. So have a good Wednesday.
Thanks for hosting this and having us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.